I am about to begin the process of making a hinge for a business card box. The materials that I use in the hinge are actually 3/32 bare bronze rod, or it's a brazing rod, and also copper tube that I get from Rio Grande, which is 0.140 outside diameter and 0.020 wall thickness. Notice that if I take the rod and the copper tube and put them together, the rod actually slips directly inside the copper tube, which is the making of the hinge. To make a hinge, what I want to do is divide my pipe into sections that will form the two sides of the hinge. Those typically you would use an odd number of sections, either 3 or 5 or 7 or 9. In this case, for this box, I'm going to use 5, and since my box is about 3.5 inches wide, I'm going to make them 5/8 inch long. Here I have marked the copper pipe. You'll see there's marks on there every 5/8 of an inch, and then I will be using my rotary tool to actually cut those off with a cutting blade. I won't do that here with the camera on this close because I don't want to damage the camera lens. The next phase of the hinge process is to sand the ends of the hinge pieces flat to get rid of any burrs on those pieces. This will help them fit together better. Then we sand the edges a little bit. And we use a tool to clean out any burrs that might be on the inside of the pieces. And this we do to all of our hinge pieces. The next step of doing the hinge is actually threading the various hinge pieces of pipe onto a short piece of the rod so that we have all 5 pieces on a piece of rod. And I cut this longer so that when I'm soldering and working with it, I have some place to grab a hold of it initially. What I'm doing now is using liquid paper to seal in between the segments of the hinge so that they do not get soldered shut when I solder the hinge to the box. So with the 2 pieces apart, I lay a little bit of liquid paper right on the shaft, close it, and then cover the outside of the area with liquid paper. And this will protect it. Now I'm going to let the liquid paper dry in place because that will form not only a seal against solder, but also will take and hold the various hinge pieces where they belong as I assemble the hinge. So I have my hinge shaft or pin with the copper pipe on it, liquid papered into place and drying. My liquid paper is dried. I've laid my hinge on my box where I want it to be, and I've marked along the top of the box and along the sides of the box where the gaps in the hinges are. I will use these as guides to lay out some liquid paper to hold the solder from getting on parts of the copper that I don't want it to. I am now getting ready to prepare to solder the hinge to the box lid. I will be soldering the hinge to the box lid at the 1st, 3rd, and 5th positions. So that metal I want to keep clean, and then the 2nd and the 4th position is where it will be soldered to the box. So I want to make sure that it doesn't get soldered to the lid, so I'll use my whiteout to take and mark that, my liquid paper, to mark the areas that I don't want solder and cover them to protect them. I now have whiteout in place on my box to protect the copper when I solder the hinge. If you notice on the top, I have whiteout in the second and fourth positions, and for the time being, on the bottom of the box, I've whited out the entire length of the box on the top edge, on a little bit on the inside and on the outside. Because when I fasten the hinge to the top, I do not want any solder attaching to the box itself. I just want to solder the top. What I'm going to do next is just take a fine file and rough up the metal on the hinge where I'm going to be soldering so that it will solder better. We are about ready to begin soldering. You can see by the positioning of the box where the whiteout is. I've used some heavy pieces of steel to hold everything in place, and I will be soldering the first, third, and fifth sections there of copper to the top of the box. I will use a plumbing torch and actually lay pieces of solder and flux in place before I solder. I'm going to begin the soldering process. I'm going to try to apply heat to both the pipe and the top at the same time. You notice it's bouncing around a little bit, and that's because my flux is boiling off. Now my solder has run in. That one's done. Go on to the next one. Solder's run in on that one. Go to the third one. And the solder's run in on that one. So I think we've got all three hinges on the top soldered. Before I put the hinge back together and begin to assemble the box, I wanted to show you that I have whiteout underneath where the hinge will go on the lid, and I have whiteout underneath the sections where the hinges are already on the top. This will allow me to solder the hinges to the box without getting solder in a position that will solder the top hinges to the box or cause issues. We are now ready to actually solder the lid onto the box. I'll get in here a little closer. And you can see we've got two spots we're going to solder where the metal's bare and been cleaned. Everything else is protected with whiteout or liquid paper. I'm going to flux the spots that I'm going to solder. Get some good flux in there. Again, cut a couple small pieces of solder to fit into the slots. And use my plumbing torch to melt that solder into that hinge. I'm holding it in place with my pick. There's the first one in. And the second one in. And now we'll let that harden. Then comes the fun part of cleaning everything off. Here you see the box ready to reassemble. We have removed all of the liquid paper from the box. We use lacquer thinner to do that. It seems to work better than anything. The other thing that we have done is the hinge pin now we have reduced in length so it's about the same length as the box. Here I have reinserted the hinge pin into the hinge that we made, and I'm showing the box open, and there's the